Okay, morning everyone. Today we're going to discuss some spatial theories related to understanding and reading of cities. Last time we discussed the picturist theory, aesthetic theory, that perhaps was the first layer of understanding and representing cities. Today we're going to discuss three theories. One of them is figure ground theory. Second is a linkage theory, and within the linkage we'll talk about space syntax, and then there is a perceptual theory. So this is perhaps one step forward in understanding the city urban phenomena, and this is the theoretical base where theoreticians have expanded into mental and physical aspects of human behavior in the city. So it has gone slightly beyond the aesthetic norms of those picturist theory. So the first one was Louis Mumford. Louis Mumford was an American planner, sociologist, late 18th century, and he passed away recently. 20 years back though. But he began to write about cities. He was not a urban designer or kind of related to the field, but he was interested in writing about cities, and he began to develop very generic understanding about reading of cities. So what you see on the screen is 9 different diagrams, and he began to define them in terms of size crowding. You look at the street structure of the city, and maybe you can look at the fabric. You can easily understand the energized conditions within the city. Now, of course, what you see on the map is a one small town perhaps, but if you look at city like Mumbai, you will find various energized conditions. They are of different scale, and once you begin to understand the variety of energized conditions, level next, that is a networking. So this is the first understanding of the cities through energized crowding. If you look at the second diagram B, what he calls it urban cluster. It means based on this first crowding, you can actually make out various clusters that exist in the city. Now these clusters could be residential cluster or mixed use cluster, or both residential and commercial clusters, and it has energized conditions embedded into it, and it has a certain sense of networking, or dependency on those different clusters together. So from large cluster to small cluster, there is a network that exists. The third category, C, is a physical circumscription. What the diagram state is that there is a clear edge condition of the city. Certain situation which describe which has a circumscription about the way city ends, whether it's a natural thing or whether it's a man-made thing, but there is a clear indication that city really kind of has a clear edge. So in modern times we talk about the way the transportation network works, and people travel from various locations, and based on transportation, the physical circumscription of cities or even the way municipality kind of govern city edge. D, he's talking about different usage. There are functional districts in the cities. Of course, if you look at the modern cities, they have a functional zones. But as city grow old, you will find this functional zone also overlaps. Functional strict zones becomes soft and mixed use zones. And such conditions are even denser when you look at the medieval cities or historic cities. So this different usage, from pure residential, pure commercial, mixed use, formal, informal, all kind of functionality of cities could be understood by making this, drawing based on functional zones. Diagram E is actually looking at urban resources. Now, urban resources are not necessarily the physical resources. It means it means that urban resources could be a simple idea of knowledge as a resource, for example, or a job opportunity as a resource. So there are various categories come under a functional zone which facilitates, and we call it a job opportunity or maximum concentration of activities, and the urban resources facilitates in establishing network, creating opportunities, connecting them. So this urban resources are very important, which also of course include the physical resources, which means water, electricity, and things like that, and how they get kind of a network with a functional zone. So it's an important way of making a diagram of cities. Next one is cities about written record. Now, written record, of course, means the way cities have been documented. That's the first step. That's the history of the city. But even the records, like the way the land management of system in the city works, how the land records, land revenues, and all kind of government governance kind of a based documentations also become a kind of a written record. And this is the way you can read cities, how city has grown. So from earlier time when people were asked to settle down in inner city of Mumbai, maybe the land records were much softer. They were all agrarian based kind of economy moving towards a trade base, and slowly the written record improves and creates a fine land management systems. So one can see a clear transitions of cities from various written documents, written records, and of course the photographs. Majority of the cities have a very interesting city and countryside, including Mumbai. I mean, you have the fringes, we call it. You can call it countryside, or maybe the agricultural land starts. So city could be clearly defined through the nature of edge conditions that has emerged over a period of time, and fringes often kind of moves into the countryside or agricultural land, and that's what we call it suburban, the evolution of suburban. Edge. This is about the monumental framework. Cities have this kind of framework. Now, monumental not necessarily means buildings. It also means important junctions. It also means transportation hub. It also means large open spaces. So one can really read monumental framework with energized crowding. A bazaar formation also is a monumental part of the monumental framework. And last one, the building and people, how buildings are formed with the people in mind, with the use of buildings in mind, and the various aspects of activity that happens. So there is a clear relationship between building and people. One can begin to understand cities with a direct relationship between building and people. So Louis Mumford actually begin to talk about, idea of the concentration of power, culture, and economy. Now, these are very powerful tool to kind of understand cities. The second aspect, the figure ground theory, we did little bit last time. Knowledge plan. Here we are going to go a little bit more. The figure ground theory kind of referred to as a figure means the focal. There are focus in the urban fabric, and ground is a field condition that works around the figure. Now, ground also means sometime grains, fine grains of buildings around the monuments, and one can really draw a clear diagram of cities through a figure ground. It means, for example, market becomes a figure, school becomes a figure, or any important landmark in the area becomes a figure, and generic fabric becomes a ground, which includes open spaces as well. So a lot of medieval cities, especially Islamic cities, they have a very strong figure ground relationship. European cities do have, but Islamic cities still continue to live with that kind of understanding that there is a strong figure, that's a place of worship, and there is a ground which is a generic fabric, including bazaar street formation, and this typology is almost similar, in many countries, where the religion is practiced, and especially if you see cities in Iran and Saudi Arabia, you will find this kind of relationship very strongly embedded. So the figure ground theory was taken up by another American planner, Roger Tranick. He went a little bit into the details of figure ground. Figure ground is not just a built and unbuilt. Figure ground is a starting point. It's a beginning of urban understanding of urban form between mass and the relationship between mass and open spaces. But what he was arguing that it is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool to understand texture and pattern of the urban fabric. So once you understand texture and pattern, you are able to establish spatial order, the way space is regulated in the city. So what you see in the drawing and the photograph is this Italian city of Siena. There are two large open spaces. Now, if you look at the space one, it's very difficult to make out what has emerged first, fabric or the open space, but they almost like a woven together. They almost like the forces that pulls the fabric in the piazzas. But then if you look at the second piazzas, it is quite simple, geometric in nature, and how these two different kind of texture they meet and they merge together. And this clearly gives a clue that there is a strong spatial order from a large open space, large urban square to a small urban square, or a large public gathering for a leisure reason to perhaps a smaller open spaces or a public realm for the religious purpose. So one can draw a clear structure through a figure ground theory, and not all the cities have piazzas like this, but if you look at Indian cities, you can talk about various other kind of spaces they emerge, through their social fabric, through their cultural practices, and so on and so forth. So we will see that example later on about the Indian cities. Another theory talks about the linkages. We call it linkage theory. And what you see on the right hand side are the three diagrams. The first diagram that we discussed, figure ground, clearly showing building and perhaps street as an open space. But once you begin to draw linkages, which is the second diagram, draw the linkages and establish those connections, you will find a new relationship that city has. And second diagram is very, very relevant to, we discussed the cities last time, Washington, DC, how the new grid has been implemented over the principal, geometric grid, simple grid versus diagonal grid. And third diagram shows the relationship of open spaces, buildings, the typology of the buildings, and perhaps a new typology, we can call it a monument, and how they sit actually in that open space. And this creates a very strong spatial network. And situation like this in any given cities becomes a generator of urban form. They generate urban form. They govern the way in which the form of the surrounding context emerge. Classical example of such phenomena in Indian context is cities in southern India. For example, Madurai, Kanchipuram. They show these characteristics. There is a strong network axiality that exists, and they form a very interesting spatial network. What they call it, spatial datum. It means armature on which the city kind of grows around, and city begins to define various activities. So, for example, in Madurai, you have quadrants. Each quadrant around temple has a specific community and specific trade. So, city kind of structures itself around the way in which the framework is evolved. So there is another layers of the linkage theory is a place theory. Now, what place theory is talking about is the way in which the place emerges, and why we are defining place different from space. Space is very abstract and very generic, while place is human centric. Place means where people meet. Place is where people visit, meet their acquaintance. It's a place where place is a space where the social and economic transaction happens. So when we talk about place, we always talk about the three-dimensional relationship of various urban components. And place theory has become a very prominent in contemporary times because place theory brings about the discourse on history, culture, and sociology. So it means, in a nutshell, it is about the context. So what you see on the top, the two diagrams, this is a small quadrant taken from Washington, DC. How a simple gridiron structure is ruptured through a diagonal grid. And in diagonal grid, if you start or if you begin to look at the edge condition of streets and relate it with the street, it gives you a sense of public realm because it has a certain proportions, it has a certain sense of staticness and dynamicness. And this is perhaps the way in which you draw the place. Now the second diagram, the middle one, has three small drawings. So if you look at the first diagram, the gridiron pattern and the buildings. When you have a situation like this, the gridiron pattern defines the building because the edges are already confirmed. But if you look at the second diagram, there is a bit of organicness. And in situation like this, the building defines the street and spaces. A lot of medieval cities have situation like that. And often urban designers speculate on this idea of these two models when they overlap. When they overlap, they become organic and they become planned. It means both street and buildings are typologically classifiable. Unlike in the first case, street is typologically classifiable. Second case, building is typologically classifiable. While in third case, building and street both are typologically classifiable. This is exactly the photograph is showing the piazza in Siena, because buildings and piazza is actually complementing each other. Now, if I look at the third example and if I compare it with Jaipur city, you can imagine the entire block that is drawn in third diagram is a one quadrant of Jaipur city. It has a very strict edge. It has a very strict urban design control on the buildings on the edges. They are allowed certain heights, certain setbacks, certain cascading inside the building lines and things like that. So they create sense of homogeneity in the street facade. But as you enter the quadrant, behind the strong edges, you will find the organic character of the city. They are constantly changing, transforming, and very difficult to identify what is governed what, whether the street has governed the block or a block has governed the street. And that gives a sense of dynamicness in the city, and which is perhaps the most desirable. In recent times, the new theory which is taking shape is space syntax theory, which is actually attempting to camouflage the linkage theory, figure ground theory, and place theory. What it hinges on this idea of the fact that any space or place becomes popular based on certain fixed parameter. So you could fix the parameter, for example, accessibility and visibility. And if you look at this example, accessibility and visibility of any given place or any given building architecture, you can develop a spatial model, you can develop a software model and talk about the intensity that exists in that particular place. Now, if you look at those diagrams, actually, starts with this idea of, the simple thing like how any given place is accessible and how that place is visible. So color code indicates the strength of visibility and strength of accessibility. So this becomes a way in which you begin to understand the existential geometry over the drawn geometry. So even if you look at gridiron pattern and start doing this accessibility visibility, and you will understand they are often contradicting to the geometric structure which were laid through drawing board. So space syntax theories are very important theory, and a lot of sophisticated models have been built on this space syntax theory by introducing more parameter beyond accessibility and visibility. And some of those parameters are also about the functionality of the blocks, mixed use versus singular use, or the building facade, or the porosity of the edges and things like that. So one can make this model more complex and allow computers to kind of do the analysis for you. So this is a way in which you can do a small analysis of area or a precinct based on the simple phenomena like visibility and accessibility, and talk about the strength of that particular place. So these models are quite prevalent in contemporary urban design educations as well as practice. As you wish to move forward in your academics and do your advanced degrees in one of these areas, you will use this model. And space syntax theories are also kind of used for various other reason, various other purpose. So what you saw was a spatial layout, the way the space emerged, but one can even look at simple idea of space syntax theory predicting human behavior, how we behave in a particular situation. And if you overlap with the land use, one can talk about various way in which the land use can be, defined. A lot of space syntax theories are used for, crime and safety. The certain spaces inculcate crime, while certain spaces, inculcate a kind of a certain sense of safety. It also being used for understanding of land value, and that is real estate. Why certain, parcel of land has more value than the other, and can that land be used for a public function? Can that land be used for something that contributes to the city? So these are the areas. Even the simple thing like ecological concern, there is carbon emission. One can begin to draw this through space syntax software and talk about the pollutions or heat islands and things like that. So there are various models that one can look at from space syntax theories. And there is a very important part of theory, which is the network theories, where you begin to draw what Louis Mumford talked about, energized conditions. And when you put all the energized conditions, or when you put all types of open spaces, or if you put all the types of chokes and chorajas, we call it in Indian context, or any kind of public realm that you think is important part of urban fabric, if you start putting them together, you will find a very interesting diagram of the city. So what he talked about the three different ways. One is a compositional form where open spaces, density of activity, energized conditions, crowding can have a very simple geometrical structure. They are either similar in nature or hierarchical in nature or complementing each other. But there is another way in which you can look at this network. It's a megaform theory where there is a central armature, and on that armature you will find various things are organized around. So a lot of this bazaars of inner city in Mumbai, you will find this kind of megaform where central activities are commercial, economic, and surrounding you will find mixed use, and then maybe a community living around it. So the megaform structures are a lot of these inner city conditions, while the third conditions are group form, which is more contemporary times, where you see various density of activities, and you have a transportation network and how they are connected through this kind of transportation corridor. And a lot of these cities that you see emerging in recent times are basically a group form. Especially in Europe, you will have small cities. You don't have a large cities. You have small cities. They are grouped and they are connected through a kind of a very interesting network, of mobility. So this network theory proves that geometric field of plan and activity that we imagine is often contradictory in reality. Geometric layer does something while existential order does something else. Both the diagrams, both the plan, both the photographs that you see are actually saying something about the way in which organic cities are camouflaged with the planned cities, or second one, black and white photograph, shows a strong diagram of city, radiating cities, and how these radiating forms, they become very generic as they meet the fringes, and you will find a completely contradictory form, contradictory nature of activities. They emerge over a period of time. So one has to, when one talks about representing cities, drawing cities, one has to take this challenge to establish the DNA of the city, how city has emerged and how city has transformed. There are two different things, and one has to kind of collate these two opposite poles together in this understanding of cities. So this is the photograph of our desert cities in northern India. And again, as I said, Indian cities, and especially southern cities, that southern part of the world, they demonstrate a different picture in which the city structure emerges. The space network that we see in such cities are significantly different from the one we have seen in the earlier example. So if you look at any of these theoretical models and want to study these cities, these models need to be modified and maybe integrate with some other aspects. For example, the social structure of the city. And this integration is very important. This process allows you to lay your hands on, different kind of meaning of spaces that southern cities, talk about. And of course, the Kevin Lynch imageability, which Ankush has given it to you all. He was an urban planner from MIT, Boston, and he carried out very interesting survey of the Boston Harbor area. And what you see, the map, where he asked everyone to draw the map of that particular area, and everyone began to draw the map with their mental cognition, and Lynch could identify a distinct pattern in this mental mapping, and he came up with this idea that these are the 5 components that decides the city structure within your mind, within individually, how one individually interact with cities. So one is always locate the sense of path, and path also has a strong sense of edge conditions. Often, you walk along the garden edge, you walk along the building edge, and so on and so forth. You also identify what is a district. It means there is an energized conditions in a given situation, and within that district you will find various nodes. Nodes are the large pause points, and then within the district and condition of nodes you begin to see a landmark. Now landmark is not just the building, but landmark also means densest activity, and also means the dense fabric. So this is perhaps a way in which you develop urban structure in your mind. You can start, experimenting on yourself, take your area and start making drawings, and you will draw some of this, drawings based on very close to what this model is talking about. So when you actually translate this, into a map, it literally comes about that it has a very distinct, embedded condition. So what you see on the top are a very generic drawings, but on the bottom you will see specific diagrams, and he is actually making those diagrams, translating those earlier findings into actual map of the city. And once you start doing that, you will find a city reveals a different kind of structure. Of course, the model has a limitation because it deals with certain area. It cannot engage with a city like Bombay as a large, but you can take small pieces of mosaic and start developing, experimenting this model. It will be a very important exercise when you are dealing with research areas, talking about city and urban form. So if you start making simple figure ground drawings of various cities, you will find different structure, different kind of fabric formation. And this is a basic fundamentals of urban theories to establish the relationship of figure ground. And based on this figure ground, one has to move forward and develop larger understanding through linkage theories, through compositional theories, through perceptual theories, so on and so forth. So you can actually start adding layers and layers of complexities. And if you are, able to exercise space syntax kind of a model, which has a software actually, and then you can feed in the data and photographs and things like that, which will really reveals very, very interesting understanding of the fabric. So what you see, the 9 cities, 9 different types of urban fabric, or a mosaic, or you can call it a figure and ground relationship. You can take it back to Louis Mumford model and start looking at each of them, into a kind of a very generic diagrams, and these diagrams will reveal very specific characteristics of each cities. And this is a perhaps way in which you start, representing cities. Thank you.